So I'd like to just welcome back onto stage all our speakers, so Amel, Daisy, and also Matt as well. That's great, and thanks a lot for coming back and joining us. We have already received a few questions from today's audience, but if you'd like to submit a question for the panel to discuss, simply just pop it in the stage chat box with a Q&A at the beginning so that the team can easily identify that. And if we have time at the end, we'll certainly ask the questions. Okay. So the first question for the panel is from Olivia. Olivia is asking, how can I challenge derogatory comments about being a woman without people thinking I'm overly sensitive or can't take a joke? Would anyone like to pick up that?
I'd love to start. Could I start?
Thanks, Daisy.
So I think it's really important. I love this question because it comes up a lot. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves that actually it's okay to be sensitive. And I think sort of looking at how that word itself has become sort of a negative connotation with, you know, challenging derogatory comments. So that in itself is an issue. But it's also okay for people to think that we can't take a joke. In this context, there are wider problems at hand than what people think of us. And, you know, the people that know us, they will know our boundaries. And if they don't know us, then they should be made aware of those boundaries. So don't necessarily feel like you have to compromise your challenging so that the person who made the comment likes you any more or less, you know. And I think that's easier said than done, because as humans, we like to please and we don't like people to think, you know, to have misconceptions of us. But I don't think it's important to want to appease the people that criticize you for challenging their derogatory comments. You know, why should we try and please the people who stand against our principles? And you are hardly sensitive by standing up to your principles, standing up for your principles. You are strong and you are being heard, and you should be proud of that, regardless of what anybody else thinks you are. They obviously don't know you well enough, because you're standing up for your beliefs, and by making that stand, you are helping the problem. You are the solution. So I think there should be sort of, I don't have an answer to what you should say to people who call you sensitive, but I think there needs to be some sort of, you know, internal awareness that it doesn't matter if somebody thinks you're sensitive. It's about what you're doing, actually.
Okay, great. Thanks. Would anyone else like to comment on that? Okay, and I think it's also, it's also important to think about who else is around as well. So if I'm there, it's also up to me as well to call out something nasty. And I think Amel mentioned that as well and picked up on that point. I think it's important to have active bystanders who are there and also standing up for things that are said as well. So thanks for that, Daisy. So the second question is from Rachel. She says, besides the widely spoken gender pay gap concerns, what would you say are the often other less spoken about causes that we should advocate for? So is there anything else apart from the gender pay gap, which there's a lot of discussion about more widely? Are there other concerns that we should be advocating for?
I think not fully sure that this is going to answer the question, but I think one of the things that Matthew was speaking to is this sort of maternity penalty or motherhood penalty or carer. It's because it's not just mothers who are primary carers. There is the concept of law, consultancy, a number of different industries which are kind of greedy professions. They demand more than just a 40-hour working week, and there is a greater reward for people who can consistently work the 50, 60-hour working weeks. And that penalizes people who have caring obligations, whether that's children, an ill family member or whatever is the case, or just somebody who wants to have a different work-life balance. I think part of the answer to that is flexible part-time arrangements, things like that. But I think it's really important that those are not seen as just options for women or just options for people who have children, because people want to live their lives in different ways and are completely capable of doing a great job whilst having a different work structure. So I think thinking about those sort of broader societal pressures on carers and people with children, and making sure that flexible part-time arrangements are not seen as secondary to kind of, you know, the normal route, normal way of progressing through law firms.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone else like to comment? Sorry, Matt, you've just gotten back on mute again.
There we are. Rookie error. I was just going to say, entirely agree with what Amel said. She, really, articulate. I think the issue there, and one thing that I certainly saw was those that took time out, and the term maternity penalty, I think is very appropriate. They saw their careers stagnate, whether they wanted to or not, and coming back into work, in effect, that they'd lost, a year's PQE and more, by having had obviously what was 12 months out of the business. So I personally think that is a real area of focus, and I know there has been, measured progress with that, but I think there's, a great deal more that can be done as well.
Great, thanks. And I think for me, something, and certainly the video that was first played at the start of this session, that something that came out for me was around the thought around intersectionality as well, and how that plays a role within this, and how we need to be looking at and thinking about people as just not one homogenous group, or as one single characteristic, and how that plays out for different people as well is quite important. The third question that we have is from Cameron, and he's as how can I be an ally without being patronising and assuming someone has struggled due to their gender?
So I think this is really interesting, actually, especially at the minute in light of these, quite shocking statistics. I think there's a lot of men who don't know how to react, with, in the fear that they won't react in the right way. And I think I'm not speaking for all women here, and I can't, but I think it would be okay to assume that a woman has struggled because of their gender. I don't think there's anything wrong with necessarily assuming that someone has struggled with their gender, because from the recent statistics, 97% of women have been sexually harassed, and most women have also been discriminated against because of their sex. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to assume that a woman has had to face some sort of gender adversity in her life, because the likelihood is that she will have, and even if they haven't, acknowledgement that this is an issue, I don't think would offend many women. I think in terms of allyship, I think it's important that you don't make this about you. Many men consider themselves allies, but are quite happy to comment on the experiences of women. And women are the best people to comment on the experiences of women. So you will in no way be patronising by showing support and allowing space for women's voices to emerge. And if you're looking for sort of practical things to do to help, stand up to the boys when they say or do something derogatory. Like Patrick said, show that support, be vocal, and recognise anything problematic in your own behaviour, and that internalised misogyny, which I referred to earlier, it will be uncomfortable, and you will feel guilty, and it won't feel nice. But by doing that, you are acknowledging the bias, and you are acknowledging that it exists. And I think, as Amel was saying, a lot of being an ally is working on yourself and your immediate environment first. And that's how society changes from the inside, by concentrating on what you what you can develop on and how you can grow and contribute. So I think a lot of about being an ally in this situation is removing the focus on yourself, in that, you know, not making it about you, but learning from the inside, from your own will, and not relying on women to do the work for you.
That's great. Thank you, Daisy. I think that's really helpful. I've got a question for Amel here, actually, and it's about how do Herbert Smith Freehills continue to promote gender diversity while being a global firm encompassing different cultural attitudes?
Interesting question, and it's suggesting a sort of a dichotomy there, which I don't necessarily see. Yes, people have there different things, and they're being a bit slow. Will mean different things around the world, and people relate ways, and you adjust to that. But we're in the workplace, we are all being professional, and our focus is on doing the best for our clients. There's I'm sort of struggling to see kind of the dichotomy there. I think that gender is a challenge kind of around the world, unfortunately, and we take slightly different approaches and adjust for cultural expectations, but we don't change our values wherever we are in the world. We don't change the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, both in terms of excellence for our clients and kind of the best possible experience for our employees and people at the firm, and trying to help people, you know, be the best they can be.
Okay, great. Thank you. And there's also another question that I've just seen on the chat, and it's asking, the pandemic has been described as taking women's lives back to the 1950s. Do you think there will be any positives taken from the overall lived experience when we come out on the other side that will benefit women?
Yeah, and I saw something, I think it was a lawyer, but it was an article somewhere in the legal press that did an analysis of, I think it was working parents and their expressions of whether they wanted to be partners. And amongst women, I think there had been a big decline during the pandemic in people that wanted to be partners, which suggests a real dip in sort of how many people want to go for that. You know, within private practice, that is seen as the thing that you should go for. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, success looks different and can be achieved in lots of different ways, but within private practice, that's kind of the carrot that everyone's that you know you think you're going for when you join a law firm. So to see that people are stating that they're less interested in that could mean a number of things. That stepping back from the office has made them realize that actually they don't want to do that. But I think when you're seeing the biggest drop amongst women, yes, they've been massively impacted by taking on more of the domestic labour, more of the homeschooling. And I think it's really emphasised that our working practices are not really constructed to allow for those roles. It's not saying that you can't do it, but it's quite difficult, and childcare is not where it should be. Our domestic arrangements probably are not as enlightened as they ought to be. So there's a lot of work, and I hope that that's an area in which we get back to where we were quite quickly once childcare facilities, schools are fully open. But I think people will really bring that kind of exhaustion and that just state of being fed up back with them into the workplace, because it's a long slog doing the second, third shift once you've done a busy day.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think along the same line, Sophie has asked a question, which is it sensible or worthwhile to ask my firm what support they can offer me so that I don't have to choose between a family and a career? Matt, I think you...
Conscious I'm speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take this one. I think it's a difficult question, because obviously when you embark on your career and you're going, you're new in, whether you're at an interview or you're new in the door, I think there's always a natural sense that you don't want to ask a kind of question that in any way sort of singles you out, or you think will rock the boat. I think what I was saying at the kind of end of my presentation before, in terms of your access to information about an institution and what they're actually putting out there in terms of their commitment to supporting women who want to have a family, and the examples that they're able to give by way of their own people who they're supporting doing that, should give you, I think, a kind of clear indication whether you're going to be able to actually have that support as you wanted and continue to have a career and a family, and balance the two alongside it. And there are a number of different things I think you could ask without directly asking the question. And one might be what their approach to sort of flexible working hours are, or do they have many women who are balancing childcare commitments in their institution or organisation, and how do they manage that? How do they kind of still get to be part of this great firm culture, and make sure that they're obviously driving all the benefits of that, but they're also able to meet their home demands as well. So I think you can ask the question, perhaps not as bluntly as that, but I think you can get the answer with a bit of probing and a kind of research. But please come in, Daisy and Amel, because I think you've been very interesting in your answers, and better than I. So.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and the sort of probing and trying to get as much information, and it's choosing where you start your career, and many of you will already have made this choice, but choosing kind of where you start your career, where you move to. I trained at one firm actually and moved to HSF as an NQ, just by the by. That will have the biggest impact on your day-to-day experience and your happiness in your life, because where you work is important. And it is really hard to see what that's going to be like before you join. But it's an organisation made up of people, so try and speak to as many people as possible, whether it's law fairs, whether it's friends of friends, talk to people and try and get kind of the inside track. You need kind of a representative sample. So talking to one person, don't take that as gospel, because their experience may be different, very different from the next person. But don't just scrutinize what firms put out, but attend events, really talk to people. I would say that's my advice. A lot of these kind of firm policies are not available until you join a firm, and maybe that's a direction that that there may be progress in the future, but you don't necessarily know what the policies are on flexible working, on maternity, paternity, family leave, or those kind of arrangements until you join, but they can have an impact. So ask people who work there, and try and get as much information as possible. But yeah, asking the question directly of, how can you help me, so I don't have to make the choices, is that might be difficult at your entry point or at your interview point, or when you're just starting, because that is a personal decision for you. And the firm will tell you kind of what policies are available and different arrangements that people have, but they can't make the decision for you, and they wouldn't want to.
That's great, thank you. I'm conscious of time and giving opportunity for networking afterwards, but I've got probably one or two more sort of final questions for the panel, and one's from Nina, and it's quite interesting question. She asks, do you deal with gender issues differently if it is a woman that is perpetuating the problem versus a man? For example, can a woman in power become numb to the issues and their indifference hinder promoting change and equality as they are in a senior position?
So I saw this issue, emerge, especially on International Women's Day. There were a lot of posts on social media which highlighted the number of females in, say, CEO positions who were promoting International Women's Day as a method of marketing and advertising for their product or their service, while they themselves had a record of unfair treatment towards female employees, substandard working conditions, wages below the national average. So I think it's dangerous to assume that although a woman has succeeded in achieving a position of power, despite various gender-related obstacles, once the patriarchy works in your favour, then some women become disconnected from that female collective movement. And recently I finished recording my first podcast. And in that podcast, we looked at how ironically detrimental Margaret Thatcher was for the liberation movement. And we don't really want to go into politics now. But, she outwardly stated that she owed nothing to women's liberation in being the first female prime minister. And again, Amel sort of touched on this, and we discussed that it was predominantly because of her masculinity. And she approached the role with what some people would term, certain male traits. She was unemotional and opinionated and strong-willed. And it was because of that masculinity, some would say, that she achieved that position of power, because those traits were traditionally men. So I think there's that sort of connection that the more masculine you are as a woman, the more successful you will be in business. And then, of course, the more you can relate to men, then the less connected you become with the female movement. So I think it's definitely different. There's definitely a sort of a difference in gender relating to gender progression and movement. And I think there's almost the betrayal aspect of it, isn't it? When a woman in power who you look up to is then seen to not be supporting women who are, aspiring to be them. So I definitely think there's that edge when women, because it's almost expected of some men, in a male-dominated society. But when a woman sort of starts to invalidate the movement, then it's a little bit more personal. But I think that's a really interesting question. And I think there's, is wide, massive scope for discussions about, male and female characteristics and how that works in business. But yeah, good question.
Okay.
I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked, when will it be enough? How many women do you need on the Supreme Court for it to be enough? And she said 9. And that doesn't, I don't think she was trying to say, it needs to be 100% women and men have no utility. The point is, there have been only 9 men on the US and UK Supreme Court, and that wasn't an issue. That was understood to be, at the time, that was meritocratic and it was fine. When there can be 9 women or when there can be all women panels or whatever, and it's not an issue, that's sort of when you're done. Going back to the question, that was a bit of time, but going back to the question, I think there's a lot of research which shows that where you have very few women in an organization, in an industry, it can be even harder for those women and sort of you have more sexism maybe going on than if you sort of had no women, or if you had so I think the answer to that is that you need progress and you just need more balance. I think we don't really kind of get anywhere talking about characteristics, because people are people, and you have some men who are brilliant communicators and very empathetic, and some men who are not, and you have women who are brilliant communicators and leaders and empathetic, and some women who are not, and your experiences are likely to be determined more by individual personalities and characteristics than whether you're dealing with a man or woman.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Thank you. And just one final question. I think it's appropriate and leads on from what you've just said, Amel. This is from Laura, and she says, what barriers do you feel those who do not fit the gender binary face in law, and how can we become a more inclusive profession for them? Daisy, I think this sort of picked up a bit of what you started to talk about, and maybe links a bit with the workshop that you attended as well recently. And I don't know whether there's any learning from that that we could use.
Yes. So I feel a little bit disadvantaged at the fact that I've never worked in a firm. So the other two might, have a little bit more on what firms can do to progress sort of inclusivity in that sort of sense. But the workshop that we attended, the transgender inclusivity workshop, it sought to it was a very open discussion. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people have, just the fact that they haven't ever been sat down and told that, these are the right, these are the wrong things to say, these are the questions you should ask, this is what's happening. In the transgender inclusivity workshop, we went through the process by which trans people have to go through. And if you're not trans, then that's not something you necessarily naturally know about. And so I think there's a lot to be done in law about sort of acknowledging and understanding, like we've said before, from your learning, from your self-willing learning journey, about the appropriate terms to use, which we were talking to the person who was leading, and they were saying, it's not a big deal if you accidentally misgender someone, but if it happens all day, every day, by different people, at work, at home, when you're out in public, it becomes a full-time role for you to have to teach other people about what is appropriate and what we should be doing to progress that. And they were saying that it is draining, and that the role should be moved on to other people. So looking at progress in those areas of intersectionality, people of colour, disability, sexuality, LGBT, it's up to the people that are not in those groups to really step forward and to make it happen, on behalf of those marginalised groups.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it picks up a lot on those things in terms of firms and things that we talked about in terms of pronoun usage. You mentioned earlier your talk about the sort of the bathroom, and I suppose in terms of thinking about all gender bathrooms and thinking about the policies within law firms and this sort of zero tolerance approach, as well, as all really important. I'm conscious that I want to give people time to network and to speak to the panel and to each other as well. So I want to just, I suppose, bring this section to a close by thanking our panelists. So Daisy, Matt and Amel, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening and giving us a really interesting insight. I think you all brought something slightly different and really important to the discussion and the debate. So thank you very much on behalf of ULaw for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if you'd like to network with fellow guests and speakers and to find out more about the support and services that are available at ULaw, you can visit the Expo booths by clicking on the Expo icon. So from the University of Law and today's speakers, thank you very much for attending the Diversity Matters event. Thank you.
Thank you.